And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, June Christy, her life and times and best hits, and during this hour, we're going to be talking about some of her best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of the albums we're going to be talking about. The first one's called June's Got Rhythm. So, Christy herself called this album Intimate Swing. Her renditions of the songs are tasteful and memorable, songs like I'm Glad There Is You, My One and Only Love, When Lights Are Low, and Blue Moon. Do It is the next album. This one's a collaboration between Stan Kenton and June Christy in the 50s. This is one of the best albums from her Capitol Hill compilation. They perform a series of jazz classics together and their singing is highlighted by their contrasting vocal deliveries. The next album is called Ballads for Night People. This one sees June Christy on a ballad-oriented album. There's French horn music, saxophone and harp music. One of her best albums highlights include Do Nothing Till You Hear From Me, Kissing Bug and My Ship. And an album called June Christy Recalls Those Kenton Days. This album compilation features some of her best collaborations alongside Stan Kenton's orchestra, from Across the Alley to Alamo to The Lonesome Road. Kenton's bandmates on the album. So that was a quick recap of what's coming up during this hour, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. We'll be right back after some music. Stay tuned. This is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, June Christy, her biography and best hits, and during this hour, we're going to be talking about more of her best albums of all time. The first one's called June's Got Rhythm, released in 1958. Most of Christy's albums feature her vocals backed by orchestral instrumentals. This record is an exception. On this album, she's on vocals alongside a nonet featuring trumpet, trombone, tenor and oboe music. Christy herself calls this album Intimate Swing. Her renditions of the songs are beautiful and memorable, songs like I'm Glad There Is You, My One and Only Love, When Lights Are Low and Blue Moon. Also, she's got some great scatting or improvisational singing going on songs like It Don't Mean a Thing and All God's Children. So a great 1950s West Coast jazz album. Do It is the next album. This was released in 1955. This one was a collaboration with Stan Kenton in the 50s. It's also one of the most intricate albums from Julie's Capitol Hill compilation. So Julie and Ken perform a series of jazz classics together. Their singing is highlighted by contrasting vocal deliveries. Christy's vocals are smoky and vulnerable. Ken's voice is booming and resonant. That contrast brings out the essence of the songs. So this is a duet that is like a musical equivalent of a beautiful painting, psychologically deep, intellectual and satisfying. Also, Kenton's on piano in this setlist. His playing is very powerful and grandiose. So here are some of the highlights from the album: Angel Eyes, How Long Has This Been Going On, and Come to the Party. Another album called Ballads for Night People, released in 1959. On this album, June Christy is on a ballad-oriented album. There's French horn music, saxophone and harp music. It's one of her best albums. Highlights include Do Nothing Till You Hear From Me, Kissing Bug and My Ship. Now, two of the hallmarks that characterize Christy's singing was her love for lesser-known hits and covering well-known songs with a unique twist. These songs are a prime example. Standard tunes like Duke Ellington's classics are portrayed as melancholy but also with a sunny touch to them. There's a song called My Ship. Many singers have covered this song, but June Christy's interpretation is probably the most unique. There's lesser-known songs like Night People. In these songs, it's a background instrumentals, the contrasting instrumentals that blend to give unique sonic landscapes to the song, while shining the spotlight on Christy's vocals. There's fast-paced tracks and slow-paced tracks. Another album called June Christy Recalls Those Kenton Days. This one was released in 1959. So June Christy's vocals would often provide a great supplement to Stan Kenton's band's performances. She was one of their star performances, recorded several solo long plays on the strength of her success with Kenton's band. So this album compilation features some of her best solos with the group, like Across the Alley from Alamo and The Lonesome Road. Kenton's bandmates on the album include trombonist Milt Bernard, saxophonist Paul Horn and others. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, June Christy, her life and times and best hits. Now it's time for some trending album news. So right now, a great Duke Ellington compilation album is trending at the top of the jazz charts for this week. It's called Echoes of Harlem, A Salute to Duke Ellington Volume 2. The album is by Detroit-based music group Planet Nonet. So this album was released in 2023, was a massive success right off the bat. In this album, it's a talented group of musicians covering Duke Ellington favorites in brilliant, unique styles. It's their second tribute album to Ellington after their first similar album, A Salute to Duke Ellington. Some of the songs in the album: Echoes of Harlem, Caravan, Sophisticated Lady and more. These songs are covered very poetically and nostalgically. They're more than just reinterpretations of a great Ellington classics. They are inspired. There's something creative about them, the way they are reworked for a modern audience. And these tracks are basically taken from live performances by the band. So that was some trending album news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, June Christy, her life and times and best hits. And during this hour, we're going to be talking about some of her best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of what's coming up. The first album is called Daydreams. This one's a compilation that contains all June Christy's Capitol Hill recordings between 1947 and 50. In this album, we get a glimpse into her innovative, groundbreaking style. She performs a variety of hits from jazz classics to novelties. The next one's called Do Re Mi. This album is based on the Broadway song Do Re Mi, and contains children's classics that take the audience back to their own childhood days. The album was a compilation of children's songs but arranged and interpreted for audiences of all ages. Another album called Cool Christy. This compilation is a great way to discover Christy's music for the very first time. The album includes some of her early hits with Stan Kenton. The compilation includes jazz classics and lesser known hits like Wrap Your Troubles in Dreams, Curiosity, and I'll Remember April. And an album called Gone for the Day. This album was performed by Christy alongside a group of West Coast jazz musicians. Most of the songs are renditions of songs from the Great American Songbook. So that was a quick recap of what's coming up during this hour, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. We'll be right back after some music. Stay tuned. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. On this week's episode, June Christy, her life and times and best albums. During this hour, we're going to be talking about more of her best albums of all time. The first album is called Daydreams. This one was released in 2012. So this album contains all June Christy's Capitol Hill recordings between 1947 and 50. Exceptions include 4 previously unreleased songs and her performances alongside the Stan Kenton Orchestra. So in this album, we get a glimpse into her amazing style. She performs a variety of hits, from jazz classics to novelties. And Christy was one of the big band era's best vocalists of her time. It's easy to see why on these tracks. Her vocals are lush and sensual and powerful. What makes the tracks best is probably the way she covers them as loving, beautiful ballads. So a great compilation of soothing music. Do Re Mi was released in 1961. It's one of her most unique albums. This one's based on the Broadway song Do Re Mi, contains children's classics that takes the audience back to their own childhood days. Her vocals are supplemented by horn music and driving rhythms. This album was a compilation of children's songs, but it was arranged for audiences of all ages. There's sentimental, nostalgic songs, also upbeat, carefree ones. This is also one of the great collaborations between June Christy and Broadway. The music is simple but effective, especially on the song Swinging on a Star. There's many musicians who perform this song, Bing Crosby, Little Eva and more, but Christy's version stands out. An album called Cool Christy released in 2002. This album's a great way to discover Christy's music for the very first time. It includes some of her early hits with Stan Kenton, also some of her early solo recordings for Capitol Hill Records. This collection also showcases how Christy was good at singing various songs of various styles. She could go from swinging songs like Get Happy to beautiful ballads like September in the Rain and Lover Man. So this compilation includes jazz classics and lesser known hits like Wrap Your Troubles in Dreams, Curiosity and I'll Remember April. An album called Gone for the Day released in 1957, this album was mainly performed by West Coast musicians. The theme of this album is one of long summer nights when you can just sit back and dream about summer. A lot of the songs are renditions of songs from the Great American Songbook, for example the title track and Softly as in a Morning Sunrise. Orchestrations were beautifully done by arranger Pete Rugolo. He was also arranger for Stan Kenton's band. And these tracks illustrate his repertoire, from full orchestra instrumentals to limited instruments for a traveling band scenario. So that was our insight into more of June Christy's best albums of all time. This is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. On this week's episode, June Christy, her life and times and best hits. We've come to an end of today's episode of the Weekend Jazz Update. So now let's recap what we were talking about on today's program. So June Christy was born and raised in Springfield, Illinois. In 1954, she was chosen as a vocalist for Stan Kenton's orchestra, after Anita O'Day, another iconic jazz singer, had left the band. Some of her best hits with Stan Kenton's orchestra included songs like Shoe Fly Pie, Apple Pan Dowdy, Tampico and How High the Moon. In 1947, June Christy started out on a solo career. In 1954, she released her debut album, Something Cool, alongside a Los Angeles jazz group. The album was a massive success, peaking at the top of the charts upon release. In the mid-50s and 60s, Christy also started appearing on several TV programs like The Tonight Show, The Nat King Cole Show, Stars of Jazz, The Steve Allen Show and more. She also started touring the world at the time, performing in Europe, South Africa, Australia and Japan. So that was a quick recap of her biography. Now let's talk about some of her best albums of all time. The first one's called Something Cool, her debut album on Capitol Records. This album showcased her style in all its uniqueness for the very first time. The title track is a standout track of the album. The song went on to become one of her signature performances. The Intimate Miss Christie is another great album. This one sees Christie's vocals backed by guitar and bass music. That approach was originally popularized by singer Julie London and went on to be adapted by many other singers of her time. The technique began to define the cool jazz style that was June Christy's niche. An album called Do It, a collaboration with Stan Kenton in the 50s. This is one of the most intricate albums from her Capitol Hill compilation. Kenton and Christy perform a series of jazz classics together, and their singing is highlighted by their contrasting vocal deliveries. And an album called Ballads for Night People. On this album, June Christy is on a ballad-oriented album. There's French horn music, saxophone and harp music. One of her best albums. Highlights include Do Nothing Till You Hear From Me, Kissing Bug and My Ship. So that was a quick recap of everything that we discussed on this week's episode of the Weekend Jazz Update with Yashani Silva. And on that note, we've come to an end of today's show. You can check out my YouTube channel for archives of today's program on the Weekend Jazz Update with Yashan. On that note, I'll see you again next week. Have a great week ahead.